welcome to Quackalope, and today we're diving back into Vast, the Mysterious Manor, but this time we're touching on the expansion, the Haunted Hallways. We have finished the full breakdown, how to plays.
Thank God.
Yeah, on the 5 core characters, the general overview. If you're playing the core game of Vast, the Mysterious Manor, make sure to swing over and check those out. At this point, we're touching on the expansions, the Shadow Paladin and the Armored Knight. In this video, we're going to do our very best to follow a similar format to all the others. We're going to start with an overview of the Shadow Paladin. We're then going to dive into the setup, all the components you're looking for. We're going to swing over to this board. We're going to go step by step on each one of these actions or sequences that you can take throughout your turn. Then we're going to pull back. We're going to go in depth on key terminology and specific detail on like what each one of these actions do. And then finally, we're going to look over here on the main board, talk about strategy, gameplay, kind of interaction with the board state as a whole.
Yeah.
One important note, kind of the first thing out the gate for the Shadow Paladin is all of the expansion characters to this point actually replace core characters. So the big spider's coming off the board. The Shadow Paladin is going where the spider originally spawns here in the center. And for text reference or for your own player aids, anything throughout the rest of the book that references the spider specifically now deals with the Shadow Paladin. So, for instance, the Paladin's mission is to kill the spider. If you're playing with a Shadow Paladin, his mission is to kill the Shadow Paladin. Yep. So they're interchangeable. So, Jan, do you want to introduce us to the Shadow Paladin, the win conditions, the lore? What's going on here?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So, it's time to rage against the mansion and absolutely everyone in it. So basically the Shadow Paladin is a vengeful spirit trying to create as much havoc and as much harm as he possibly can while trying to escape the mansion at the very end. His objective is to essentially get strong enough to raise his power and escape through that front door. And the way that he will do that is by breaking chains and creating ruin across the manor.
Yeah, so the Shadow Paladin is this tortured figure trying to twist the manor in a way that isn't structurally sound, isn't quite the right phrase, but he's trying to create rooms and passages that are self-contained, that are tortured and forgotten. That creates ruin, which he's able to gather, and then he's able to do his best to escape. So he's trying to sort of, in my mind, twist the manor to reflect his own, like, tortured soul.
Yeah, it reminds me of, like, these kooky mansions where there's, like, hallways that lead to nothing. That's essentially what you're trying to do.
What he's trying to do, yeah. So let's go ahead and start with the setup. The easiest way for us to do that is I'm going to go through the setup card, the same one you'll be following. Jan is going to point out the things that we're looking for as we set up. So, to start with, place the Shadow Paladin board in front of you. Place the Shadow Paladin figure on the central pit tile. Collect the 20 ruin cubes and 5 ice tokens. Place the health cube on the 5 space in your health track. Shuffle the 16 power cards into a deck and draw 3 power cards. Find the Slithering Shroud and Eternal Gaze chain cards, and place them in the card slots at the bottom of your board. Shuffle the 10 remaining chain cards into a deck, draw 1 chain card, and place it in the remaining card slot at the bottom of your board. So that's general setup. Those are all the components you're going to be looking for. There are a few traits that are important when you're playing the Shadow Paladin. They modify kind of the general rules. Let's go ahead and touch on those. First off, Agile. You always hit on attacks and cannot be forced to attack. So that's similar to the spider, right? Second is Cowardly. You cannot enter tiles with any figures. Also, whenever you are hit, you must immediately move to the nearest dark tile. So sort of similar to the Warlock in some ways. Formidable. Your figure is not removed when hit. Each time you're hit by a Paladin or Armored Knight, you lose 1 health. So that's a trait that's sort of similar to the Paladin. And then lastly, we have Sadistic. When revealing a tile, you can place it so no open edges touches an open edge of an adjacent tile.
And that one is truly unique to him.
So that one's truly unique to the Shadow Paladin because everyone else has to deal with kind of this board in a variety of different ways. Like if the Paladin moves into a room, he has to flip it and make sure it connects. The spider's actually able to explore and gaze at multiple rooms.
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt. You were doing great.
But I was comparing it to other...
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
You don't have to
worry about it?
No, don't worry about it. You focus on the Paladin.
Focus on the Shadow Paladin.
Yes.
Okay.
You were doing great. Good job.
So those are the traits that kind of resolve or change the status of the Shadow Paladin. He is not able to move into other people's tiles. He runs away from people when they attack him. He always hits, and he can twist this manor into his own kind of image or representation of his own, chained soul.
Oh, yeah.
So let's swing over here to the Shadow Paladin board. Let's go step by step throughout like the main core actions. Every board in Vast has a very direct sequence of events that you take. So let's see what the Shadow Paladin can do.
So the Shadow Paladin, first of all, to win, needs to advance to the final space on the Shadow track to then escape the manor, which is kind of what we talked about. We'll go through what each part of this board entails later in the video, but just know that you have to move as much as you can and progress with that Rouen. So the first thing you're going to do is collect all the Rouen that's going to be laid out around the manor. Okay, so how that Rouen spreads, etc., is actually going to be touched on at the end of this process, so don't worry about it yet. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to be able to move up to 2 spaces. However, as you're moving, you're going to be able to cross walls, and similar to another role that we might have heard of before, you're going to be able to activate a multiplicity of actions throughout that 2 movement steps. So that means you're going to be able to do a slew of things in the middle of that movement, okay, and interrupt yourself as you go through it. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to spend Rouen. Okay, so spending Rouen is essentially equivalent of moving up the dial for the spider up, up, and upwards, which is, again, what you need to do to win the game. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark isolated lit tiles with Rouen cubes. So essentially think of an isolated room as basically a lit tile that does not connect to an open edge. That's essentially what we're trying to kind of like create here in order to put those cubes around. The next thing we'll do, you can discard any card and then draw up back to your spirit. Spirit, if you recall, will be very similar to another role in this game. And then finally, you'll gain ice if you did not break a chain during the round. And we'll go through what ice and what chains are very soon.
Yeah, so that's the general flow or sequence of events. You're going to be moving around the board, trying to create those isolated rooms, gather Rouen, buff yourself up. Kind of that's how you level up and also how you kind of complete the game. Let's go ahead and start here at the top. And let's actually do this in a little bit of a different order. Normally we'd start up here at collect all the Rouen cubes. Let's put that at the bottom of the sequence as if we were kind of on the first round of this game. So let's start with the move up to 2 spaces and you may cross 1 wall.
Okay.
Let's talk about what are the actions you can take throughout that process.
When you're taking actions, you can basically do it from 2 main ways. You're going to be able to either play power cards, or you're going to be able to break chains. And there's going to be a little bit of interplay between both of those.
And chains are a good thing to expand on right now. They're a unique feature to the Shadow Paladin. So these chains are actually past sins and things that have bound you and held you down. Throughout the course of your game, you're going to be able to make a decision to either keep them locked or unlock them, meaning you have that ability for free at any point. While they're locked, you can still utilize them, and we'll get into that, but it will cost you a little bit extra to do so. So that's what these chains that we keep referencing down here are. They're abilities that are revealed, just not quite accessible.
Yeah.
Okay.
They'll always be there, but you got to fight a little bit more to get them.
So let's go back up here and touch on all these different actions that we can do.
So throughout that turn, you're going to be able to play power cards, break chains, use broken chains, pay debt, and then summon walls. Most of these things, if you're familiar with any other role, are going to sound a little bit familiar, but let's go into them just in case. So playing power cards. At the beginning of the game, you're only going to start off with 3 cards. However, the more spirit you gain, the more cards you're going to be able to have in your hand, which is always a good thing. So as you start collecting these cards, each one of them is going to be able to do something a little bit differently. You have 3 cards that you're always going to be able to activate. It's going to be either Gaze, Shroud, and Float. One of the coolest things about the Shadow Paladin is that you can actually activate as many cards and as many things as you want in a given turn. So that means that you can move 1 space, play 3 cards, move another space, and then go ahead and activate as many chains as you possibly can.
A big part of how the Shadow Paladin plays is actually in that kind of big action step. You'll be building and buffing and kind of growing your abilities throughout the course of the game until that one moment where You sort of put it all on the line. You take a lot of big actions all at once and hopefully get whatever you need.
Yeah, he's the combo maker of the game,
absolutely.
and it feels incredibly satisfying once you're able to land that perfect sequence.
Yep.
So, but it does take planning. So let's go into what each of the power cards does, and then we'll explain how you can have multiple uses for each of those cards. So first we have Float, Shroud, and once again, Gaze. Float. Normally you're going to be able to move 2 spaces, but when you play a Float card for its power, you're going to be able to move an additional space. And remember when we said that some cards are going to break the initial rules that the character himself has?
Yep.
Float is going to actually let you go into spaces where there are other figures, which goes against the cowardly trait.
Yeah, and this card specifically says that. So it will tell you, but it does break larger rules. Next, we're going to have Shroud. Shroud allows you to flip an empty, adjacent, visible, lit tile.
And the reason why that's super important is because you're trying to not let the Paladin make it there, or any character make it to where there are cubes.
Well, and you're also trying to create little pockets of individual tiles. So this could be a way to cordon off a section that would then get some of your Rouen tokens.
Yeah.
And the last thing here is going to be Gaze.
So for Gaze, you're going to reveal the tile that you're on or an adjacent tile. And once again, remember, you're sadistic, so when you're revealing tiles, you actually want them to connect from spaces that are not open to edges that are. So you're essentially blocking the way for everybody else.
You're doing the opposite of what every other character is doing throughout the game.
Which is pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So those are the 3 cards you had in your hand. There's actually one more card that you didn't draw up because you didn't start with it, and that's going to be Strike. Strike allows you to attack all figures and treasures in adjacent visible tiles. Gain 1 Rouen per piece attack. The treasures are going to be removed. So what this does is anyone adjacent to you, anyone in a visible tile adjacent to you, is just going to feed you Rouen. It's a good way to get a lot of Rouen in one big swoop, but it might also leave you vulnerable to attacks if you're that close to so many figures.
So you have to make sure that you have cards in your hand in order for you to either float away or just use the basic movement that you start your turn with to try and escape a little bit. Because remember, you can cross one wall once you're moving. So that's always useful.
So those are the power cards. The very first option we have in kind of sequence 2 here allows us to play power cards. The very next one is break chains. How would we go about actually freeing these chains?
So to break a chain, essentially what you're going to have to do is discard 2 matching power cards. So for example, once we have 2 similar cards, we'll be able to discard them completely, and we'll be able to choose out of any of our lock chain cards which one we want to essentially unlock for the rest of the game.
Now, the neat thing about this is, like we said, these are abilities that are more expensive to use when they're down here and locked. Once they're freed, you can use them just by paying the cost associated on the card, and each one is unique. Each one will have text that tells you exactly what it takes to use. The other cool thing is when this happens, you can then discard any number of these chains from on you. Let's say we wanted to get rid of one of them. So we'll go and discard this one. You draw back up to fill out this lock chain section. These are now abilities that you can use. They're more expensive to use because they're still locked, or they're abilities you can actually break down the road. But don't cycle anything you think you might want to unlock later. They're all going to be valuable, so it's kind of a push and pull.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
knowing what's in that deck can be sort of valuable.
Yeah, for sure. We'd actually recommend you to go over all of the powers before starting the game, just so you have a better notion of what you can eventually unlock.
Take a look at what options you're going to do there. So after that, we're going to touch on using that broken chain. So go ahead and just talk about that card specifically. If that chain had been broken, if we just unlocked it, what would it allow us to do?
So whenever you use chains, you're always going to have to follow what's on the card. So each card essentially has its own individual price to use it. Some cards actually don't have any, so you're going to be able to activate it either way. However, after you fulfill that condition, you're going to be able to activate the card. So for example, here in Eternal Gaze, you're going to be able to reveal a tile that you're on or on an adjacent tile. So pretty similar to what usual Gaze is like.
So after we've used whatever unlocked chains that we have, we still have all these abilities down below. And we can actually use any of these locked chains. In order to do so, though, we have to pay an additional price. That additional price is 1 additional card to treat that card as if it was unlocked for a round. So what that means is if I wanted to use one of these abilities, for instance, the Slithering Shroud, I would pay 1 card to unlock it. Then I would treat the card like I treated my broken card already. I'd pay whatever cost existed on the card and then take the action or effect related.
Yep.
So
Pretty straightforward.
after that, the last thing we can do is we can summon walls.
Yeah, so this is again similar to other rules you may have heard of. So the only difference here is that you're going to have a different currency. For you to activate or summon walls, you're actually going to have to spend ice.
There are some abilities that give you ice specifically, but the most effective way to get it is sort of a passive ability. At the end of your turn down here on stage 6, you'll gain 1 ice if you haven't broken any chains during that round. So that means if you've gained ice throughout the course of the game, you can spend that ice to summon a force wall on any open visible edge. Now visibility is important here. It is as far as you can see up until a dark room. So if there was a hallway and you could see to the end of it and you wanted to summon a force wall kind of down at the end, that is possible. So keep in mind visibility rules. Those are the actions we can take. You're able to move and take actions as many as you'd like in any sort of sequence or turn order. So the structure of this is a little bit open-ended here. So after that, we move down to the spend ruin and advance the shadow track. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so anything beyond 3 to 6 is all going to be a lot more mechanical. So this is essentially kind of like upkeep for the Shadow Paladin. So the first thing you'll do after your main action phase is to spend ruin. The objective of your paladin is to essentially try and amass as much ruin as you possibly can in order to advance through this track. As we mentioned before, the spider had the dial that will essentially mark her ever-increasing power until the paladin...
I know he replaces the spider. Don't worry about it.
I don't like it when you do it to me. So essentially, you'll try to move down through this track, basically unlocking new abilities, new stronger defense, and more cards in your hand, which is always a good thing. But you have to pay special attention to the requirements and the cost that are in that particular row. So for example, starting off with the first, it's empty, so that means that you'll have to place 1 cube there as a minimum in order to unlock an additional spirit, which is now going to be 4 power cards. From that point onwards, you're going to notice that there are numbers here. So if it says 3, you're going to have to spend 3 ruin from your supply in order to unlock that new ability. And you'll keep moving downwards, trying to complete as many ruin cubes as you can as you move forward. Okay, and you'll notice that in order to win the game, you're actually going to have to spend a total of 16 in the last 2 rounds. So that's a lot of ruin.
You've got to be generating a lot of ruin by kind of the end of this game if you want to win.
But there's a balancing factor here. So one of the best things that the Shadow Paladin can do is that he can spend as much ruin as he possibly wants on his turn. You could potentially go up 3 spaces on your shadow track if you've amassed enough ruin at that point in the game.
And every time you spend ruin, you're buffing yourself. You are getting stronger. You're getting more cards. You're getting a higher defense. So if they let you get out ahead, you may stay out ahead for the majority of the game. So the next thing we're going to come to here is number 4. Mark isolated lit tiles with ruin cubes. Now, this is an important section. It is why we delayed number 1, right? Collect ruin cubes is intricately tied to placing them or generating them on the board.
Yeah, and so this is really the most important step for the Shadow Paladin, and is what you must be sure that you understand before taking on this role. And I think that kind of takes us to talking a little bit more about what exactly is an isolated tile here. We gave a brief example at the beginning of the video, but let's go ahead and describe that with a little bit more detail. So as you know, whenever you flip a tile with any other character, you have to match an open edge with another open edge. But as we know, the Shadow Paladin is sadistic, so you have to do the complete opposite of that. You have to match an unopened edge with an open edge if you can. So whenever you do that, you're going to be able to use a ruin cube in this stage of the game. So let's go ahead and look at what the example that Jesse has laid out to kind of get a better feeling of what that means.
So in this example, we have a populated board, but what we're looking for is any tiles that don't connect to another open lit tile. So we'll grab our ruin cubes over here. And remember, no one else around the table is going to be paying attention to this for you, so you need to keep an eye on it. The one we're standing on is actually isolated because there is a wall here and it doesn't open up anywhere else. This treasure token here is completely isolated. There are 3 potential rooms, but none of them lead into it. This one is not, because while it does have a weird little hallway there, it is not on its own. But this one, this blood tile down here at the bottom, is completely separated and isolated as well. So it doesn't mean that there's not something next to them. It's if you are standing in that room, would you feel alone?
Yeah. And so one of the most important things, as we talked about before, there are a lot of cards and a lot of potential abilities that you're going to be able to do in order to change these particular tiles. So for example, you might be able to rotate this at a turn, and then later, now this is isolated, and then you could potentially move across. So yeah, there are going to be a lot of factions that are going to influence your board, and they're going to shift stuff around, but don't forget, you can also do that.
Well, and a lot of those factions that are manipulating the board are going to be doing so in a way that will probably help you. Like, the Manor and the Warlock want to flip tiles upside down. The Spider wants to reveal some, but also keep some kind of cordoned off. The Paladin's just going to be revealing as he goes. But you can probably, like, subsection
Jesse! Don't worry about it. You'll discover it as you play the game. Just know that there are factions and they will be helping you.
The board's going to be changing.
Yeah.
So after we're done checking out those tiles, placing Rouen down on the board, we have to keep another thing in mind. Rouen will go away. If, for instance, this was ruined because this tile was dark and the Paladin decided he wanted to come through, flip this open, make sure that things connect in a way that is unfortunate to you, Rouen will disappear.
Yep.
The same if a character moves into a Rouen tile. Rouen will also dissolve. So you not only want Rouen to be in isolated tiles, but they want to be isolated from the rest of the game state, kind of as a whole. Make it so it's hard for other characters to interact with your Rouen cubes.
It's a really interesting puzzle to solve.
Yeah. After that, after we've placed our Rouen down on the board, you may discard any cards, then draw cards back up to your spirit.
So if by this point in the turn you have any remaining cards, you're going to be able to throw them all away, as many as you want, but understand that we're talking about the cards in your hand. So these are specifically power cards and not the chain cards that we spoke of earlier. And then you'll be able to take up to those power cards again, up to your spirit, and remember you have to keep track of what's going on your shadow track in order to know where you're at.
And then the last thing is going to be gain 1 ice if you did not break a chain this turn. Pretty straightforward. If you didn't discard 2 matching cards in order to break a chain, unlocking an ability, you will gain 1 ice. That ice will go up here on the top. There are 5 of them potentially total throughout the course of the game. You can spend that to summon walls and interact with other cards.
And remember, because the Shadow Paladin doesn't have a limit on how many things it can do in a turn, if you accumulate 5 ice, you're going to be able to put down 5 walls. Boom! So it's a lot of havoc.
So that's kind of the state of the game. Hopefully you have a good sense of how the Shadow Paladin plays. It is this weird kind of corrupting and twisting the manor into a awkward place to exist in. Like, you're making the game hard and uncomfortable for the other people around the table.
Which is fair because you've been locked in here forever and now it's everybody else's turn to suffer.
It's the fair thing to do.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, let's pull back. Let's come down here to the board itself. From your sense of things, what would be the kind of strategy or the way that you'd approach playing the Shadow Paladin?
I think there's a lot of temptation to go in and be very aggressive at the beginning of the game. And I feel that in order for you to be successful as a Shadow Paladin, you're going to have to pace yourself, which is a little bit counterintuitive to how this guy kind of like you imagine him in your head. But understand that later in the game, you're going to be able to do some really big things.
I think you're probably right. I think there's probably, over the course of a game, a few big moments in this character's kind of gameplay experience. So the first turn or two that you take might not be the most exciting.
Yeah.
But you can undervalue how much Rouen means to you, let other people reveal tiles and kind of twist the manor to have them isolated until you're able to do something really epic.
Yeah.
That's what this role, for me, is all about. 2 or 3 big moments during the course of your game that gets you to the win.
And one very important thing to remember is that you don't necessarily have to go to the Rouen in order to collect it. You will just absorb it from every corner of the mansion at the very beginning of your turn.
You don't need to know what everyone else's roles are doing. Like we've said throughout the course of this video and this whole series, don't worry about it. But one thing you do want to pay attention to is, where are people walking? Where is someone heading? So if the Paladin's diving deep into the manor, maybe put a Rouen tile over here in a corner, and maybe have a few spread out over here on this side as well. Just areas that are inconvenient for people to deal with. If there's no treasure around, if there's no characters around, then there's no reason for them to mess with you until you become a threat.
Yeah.
And by the time you become a threat,
It'll be a little bit too late.
it might be a little bit too late. So that's kind of our take on the Shadow Paladin. This is one of the expansions for Vast the Mysterious Manor. Hopefully you've had a chance to test out the other core kind of game components, the game characters, and you're enjoying what you've came across. I think this one adds a unique kind of twist on that core game. If you've made it to this point in the video,
Congrats.
please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Having your support, having you here engaging with this content really lets Leader Games and other publishers know that you appreciate the content we're doing and you want us to make more of it. But whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Get out and play some games, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.